Oh yeah. Welcome to the live stream.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Archaeology with Flint. And I'm here with Jo Hedwig Teeuwisse, also known, or better known perhaps, as the fake history hunter, where she's built quite a reputation on Twitter for hunting down fake history. So hi, Jo. It's really good to meet you over the internet.
Hello, likewise.
Can we start off? Can you just tell me what your favorite debunk of fake history is, that you get the most satisfaction or a good response when you reply to it or something?
Well, to be honest, I enjoy both good and bad responses. I love it when people say, "Oh, fantastic, thank you. I'm so glad I learned this." But I also love it when people go absolutely mad and want to fight me. I'm fine with all of that. But my favorite subject, I think it has to be all the old biases and assumptions and myths about the Middle Ages, especially daily life, because it's a subject I've been specialized in sort of for decades now. And it's also the subject I find the most interesting, the daily life of our ancestors. I don't care about the kings and the queens and the battles. I mean, some of it's interesting, but if you tell me what, the daily life of just a random person, I find that a lot more interesting.
Yeah.
So, it's the myths like, they never bathed, they didn't wash, they were dirty, they were ignorant, they couldn't read, they couldn't write, they lived in cities with the streets filled with filth. It's those cliches that we see in every single film and Hollywood movie and television show. They didn't like colors for some reason. They always wore these drab rags, brown rags, and they were always unhappy and they didn't have any fun. And I think I like that the most, the subject, because I know a lot about it, but also because when you manage to convince someone that those ideas are outdated, just wrong, you can almost hear a gear in their brain go a bit fast and suddenly have this whole new perspective of something they thought they knew for years. And that's fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point here. Wait, let me quickly share my screen just to give people a sense of this. Here, I just searched on your Twitter for examples of you explaining to people that, hey, look, people in the Middle Ages actually had access to clean water and they drank it.
Yeah, because the myth is, of course, they didn't. All their water, every single drop they had was polluted because they kept pooing in it for some reason. So they all had to drink beer every day. And that's, if you think about it logically, you already know that it's got to be nonsense. It just makes no sense. You can't live like that. And medieval people in some ways were hardier than we were, perhaps tougher, but they didn't want to live like that. They can't. It's impossible. So it usually starts with the people saying because telling everyone, especially on social media, that medieval people used to drink beer because they couldn't drink the water. It's a fun anecdote. It's a fun story.
I used to believe that when I was like 20.
Yeah, me too.
Me and my friends were like, now, all right, but what about pre-alcohol? Because does that kill all the germs and all this kind of stuff, And so we actually worked it all out when we're like 18 years old, trying to figure it out. And so
if you don't think about it too long, it makes sense. Exactly. But if you think about it a bit longer, it suddenly doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah.
But everybody was repeating it. And if you put it on social media, it's a fun story. People share it, you get clout, attention. It's a fun it's a fun fact, and whenever people say fun fact, that what's coming next is usually not a fact, at least on social media. But that's just one of those things. If you try to look at it logically, even before you start doing the research, people, even medieval people, had noses. They had stomachs. If you drink bad water, that's not a good idea. But 9 out of 10 times you can look at water and think, that looks a bit dodgy. Maybe I shouldn't drink it because, there's dead animals floating in it or worse, or it all comes down to this chronological snobbery, the idea that our ancestors for some reason were dumb, stupid, or at least a lot dumber than we magnificent beautiful people of the future are.
And I think it also just comes down to the fact that we were very effective over the course of the 19th and 20th and 21st centuries of sort of bringing water to everybody's house, right? Running water, which is a totally new phenomenon. And so people think when they look back to the past without this modern technology and infrastructure, God, life must have sucked. And don't get me wrong, I like running water. I'm not trying to say that it's a bad thing, but it doesn't mean that people in the past did not have access to water. They had wells, they had cisterns,
and some even had access to running water at
yeah,
home.
and some even
I mean,
had
it wasn't as common as it is now, of course, but it did happen even in the Middle Ages, and
even in the Roman period too. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
only really wealthy houses got connected up to the aqueduct line coming into Pompeii. So very few houses. Most of the water went to the baths
Yeah.
or to the fountains. But a
It
few
was,
houses.
it was possibly a bit more common during the Middle Ages, ironically, because we have these documents where people are complaining about everyone making their own little pipes from the conduit and the pipes that are running behind their house, so they can steal a bit of water.
There's legislation about that in
stop
classical
doing
Athens
that, everyone.
well. Yeah, exactly. In classical Athens, people were doing that, and so you know, there's these misconceptions, and you know, me on social media as well. It's just sort of like, I'm sorry, but it's hard to be on social media with the amount of misconceptions that are there. If
well,
you know,
it keeps me busy. It keeps me from doing something useful.
It's very true. So what else? What's one that gets like a negative reaction from people sometimes?
Well, it's quite funny to tell people on the internet that the Moors, who invaded part of Europe in 711 AD, didn't introduce basic hygiene and soap to Europeans. There are even some people on the internet, and I had no idea that people actually believe this before I joined Twitter. There are people who believe that before the Moors came to Europe, people in Europe were walking on all fours, living in caves, eating raw meat. Literally. They actually literally believe that. And the first time I heard someone say that on Twitter, I just assumed they were joking. I just couldn't comprehend it. And it's you know, they don't even know basic history about the Greeks and the Romans and the Celts, and everything that came before the Middle Ages to some people is non-existent. And it's very, very weird. And they actually get angry because of that, because it is something they cling on to. It makes them feel better, you know, and they have to believe that the Europeans were once upon a time backwards, dumb people that had to be saved by others, which I can sort of understand why they want to believe that. But, you know, it's just not true. And you try to explain them. We literally have people writing about using soap in Europe 2,000 years ago. How do you explain that? Was it forged by the aliens, or why don't you believe that? And sometimes I just can't comprehend it. And I'm thinking, look, it's right there. Did you? But no, they just sometimes they just can't, and they just won't believe it. And well, so be it.
Well, yeah, and I think you know, people push back a lot when you tell them that historians no longer call the Middle Ages the Dark Ages, for example. I think a lot of this is all linked up into this conception of that period of time as being just brutish, short, brutish, and nasty. And
we have this. When I say we, I mean all the humans in the world, or humans in general. Let's put it that way. We really like to have a certain image fit a certain era, and then stick by it. We don't like having that challenge, because this is what we were taught in school. And we were thought, you know, when we were taught that, right, we're done with that. That's in my head. Let's move on with life. This was reinforced in films and television and documentaries. So everything's fine. The world is fine. We can live and be happy and be merry and walk through flowers and all that sort of thing. And then someone comes, well, actually, we don't believe that anymore. And that people almost automatically go, no, no way. They don't like change, which I completely understand again. But what I never understand is the idea that they're so resentment, that they so resent being learned something new or changing their mind, that they just refuse to believe what is obvious evidence. But you know, humans are being human sometimes.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I think it rocks people's worldview. They like a very simple picture of history, and it's sort of like the reality of history is it's not
Yeah.
that simple.
No, the only time someone when I have to agree with someone regarding the term dark ages, when they say I know it wasn't so bad as people say, but it's a much cooler name, and I absolutely
That's definitely true. Yeah,
it's perhaps the coolest name in history, the Dark Ages. Wow. I mean, the Roman era, Middle Ages. What do you mean middle? There's no dark. You almost hear, dark music coming up and clouds parting, and it's a cool name. I completely agree.
Yeah, and I think it also fits into this idea people have of sort of catastrophism, where there's a civilization that rises, then it falls, then it rises, then it falls, and it's just like that's not really how things happen. That's just an easy way to think about it.
It gives us hope that some of the civilizations we have today that we don't like may one day fall.
Hope. Okay, so how did you get into all this? How come you know the answers to all these myths that ordinary people get?
Most of the time I don't, but okay. I'm just let's be modest, I'm a pretty decent researcher.
Okay.
And I should be, because it's been my job for literally decades now. I've been researching history for decades, for about 20, more than 20 years now. And when I started, I had to go to the archives, to libraries, all that sort of thing, and use books. And so when I started, then the internet came, sort of. So I've been researching on the internet for a very long time as well. So I know a lot of tips and tricks and things like that. I know how to play Google. And I have a lot of connections. I know lots of archaeologists, historians, researchers, people who work for film and television, prop makers, people who are obsessed with collecting matchboxes. That's all the people I've been collecting over the last throughout my career. But when you've been researching so long, I mean, I've worked for museums, I've worked for documentaries, I've worked for authors, and it's pretty much all I do. And I do it for fun. I'm genuinely addicted to it. When I watch something on television and someone says something, I immediately go, really? I need to know more. Tell me more. Which is a bit sad. but so I've been doing it for such a long time that I almost automatically know where to look and how to look. And I wrote a little chapter about that in my book, helping people to figure out how to use search engines, where to go, why you sometimes should and sometimes shouldn't trust an article you find online, the importance of sources. And I think it all comes down to being taught as a child or very young to think critically, not to automatically believe something because it's there. And I must say I'm still sometimes shocked by how little people have that same idea of thinking, because they say what I say is true because someone on TikTok said it. What? Or it's true because I found this random blog that someone wrote. So it must be true. You go, but where's the evidence? Where's the proof? Where are the sources, the references? There's nothing there. And some people just don't understand that. And I find that really weird, but I love trying to find the original source of something, the original, where does it start? Where does it come from? And in my experience, that is the only way to get close to the truth. For instance, the story about Queen Elizabeth I, again, not bathing, but also saying I bathe once a month, whether I need it or not, or something like that. This is so well known in English history, in culture. It's such a part of the history. It's taught in schools. It's in museums. It's in television series, in documentaries. It's in history books by renowned historians. Recently read it in a history book. And
you want to name this historian?
No. No, they follow me on Twitter. But it's the thing is, the quote comes from a Victorian joke, which has nothing to do with Queen Elizabeth, and we know that except for the last couple of months or perhaps year of her life when she was really not quite well, she bathed and washed a lot. A lot. She had a traveling bathtub for on the road. She had a bathroom with wonderful shells all over the walls. and it was attached to a room where
Here we go.
musicians should play. So yeah, exactly. There she is. That picture, by the way, is not a real photo. Just so you know. But she even had a little room next to her bathroom where musicians would play when she was taking a bath. So, and if you have music and you're in the bath, you're going to stay there for a long time because it's way too relaxed. So it makes absolutely no sense. But because it's such a familiar story, such a famous story, people say, they look at a book that was written 20 years ago and it says there, and it was written by someone we respect, so it must be true. They don't, and if you have to keep going back to the original source, and that was such a fun story to research, because suddenly you realized, hang on, this thing that everyone believes it's just not true.
Yeah,
and that is exciting. That's like a bit like being a detective. That's such a rush.
Very cool. Yeah, I'd never actually heard that one before I came across.
Yeah, it's a very English thing.
And I should also point out, since I forgot to, we need to plug your book really quickly. Your book is recently out from Penguin, and let me share an image of it. Here we go. Fake History: 101 Things That Never Happened. So everybody should pick it up because all these stories are in there. And I have to say, it's written just beautifully. It's funny and it's insightful. It makes you think, but at the same time, it keeps you laughing, which is important, and appalled at some parts of our world. But yeah, so okay, this culminates in a book. I get that. It starts off with you being like a historical consultant for museums and
yeah, and I'm one day I'm on Twitter and there's something there, and to my shock, horror, and surprise, someone on the internet turned out to be wrong. And I thought, let's go and correct this. And I think it was a 1920s photo. Someone said, look at this 1920s photo. And I thought, that's not a 1920s photo, because, by that time I'd already been a researcher and consultant for such a long time. I must have seen millions of photos from the 1920s. And sometimes you just get this sixth sense. You look at it and you think, I know that this is not from that era. You can't quite put your finger on it, but you just know. Mm-hmm. So I researched it. Turned out it was a 1950s photo from a 1920s themed musical. So I corrected this person and I did it a couple of more times. And, half the time people were really excited and really happy. And they said, oh, thank you. Oh, wow, I had no idea. This is so fascinating, brilliant. And that made me feel good. And the other half of the time, people got really angry and shouty and sweary and wanted to fight me. And I thought, oh, this is also fun. So there I was, evenings by the fireplace, thinking, what shall I do tonight? And I thought, you know what, let's go do a bit of fake history hunting. And it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed myself, and I became a bit addicted. And suddenly, eventually you correct someone with a large following. I don't know who it was. I don't remember. I don't know why or how, but there were always these moments where you went from 1,000 followers to 10,000 followers in just a couple of days. And then it stays flat for a while. And then lots of people see one of your corrections and you start following you. Before you know it, you've got, I think they've got 270,000 followers. It's insane. And it's really weird. I mean, I've posted things that have been seen by 8 million people. And that's just insane. I mean, everything I've done, all the projects I've worked on, the museum exhibits I've worked on, film and television programs I've worked on, even big films that were seen by a lot of people, nothing I did ever reached this many people. So I thought, well, better make use of that.
But when I first came across you, you developed a system where you sort of were consistently replying oftentimes with memes. I remember about quotes. Let me see if I can find one. You have like a list of these things, don't you?
I have a hunting list.
Here we go.
There's a lot of things on that list. The quotes I do probably once or twice a month because there's just too much of them. It drives me mad. and it probably quite a lot of people who follow me also get a bit tired of it if I do it every day, because they see all those pictures come by. Yeah. That's just too much of that. But it's
and the algorithm is sometimes weird, because I noticed that if you click on one of your debunks, then it'll keep showing you the same debunk like over the next few weeks rather than different ones. So there
Yeah,
was a period where I just kept seeing you debunking the medieval people bathing thing, and
yeah.
I'd go check, and you're obviously posting other things, but for whatever reason that's what Twitter would show me on my feed. And
Yeah,
so,
and of course, because I go by this list, and because sometimes a subject is very popular on Twitter, sometimes I do correct the same thing 20, 30 times in one day. That
okay.
sometimes happens. For instance, if an American celebrity tells the world that they only shower twice a week, there are a lot of people who go to Twitter and start talking about how dirty medieval people were, which is always a surprise to me, especially as I generally don't even know who the celebrity is. So I have no idea what they're talking about. And there's this long thread of people going, yeah, this celebrity, this and this celebrity, oh, it's so dirty, 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 dirty. Did you know medieval people never bathe? And then suddenly here I am, out of nowhere, minding their business, going, well, actually, it is so weird, but always entertaining.
Yeah. Do you try to search for tweets that are more popular that are spouting fake history, or
Uh,
accounts, or do you just go for everything?
with some subjects, yes. For instance, the quotes, I do not correct quotes from people who don't have thousands of followers. And sometimes when someone has only a couple of followers and they rarely tweet, I think I don't want to bother them, because you can't underestimate the power of having a big account.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And in the past, that has sometimes gone wrong when I just see one person and I cheekily, with a little wink and a smile, correct and go, oh, actually, that's wrong. And then hundreds of people, because they follow me, all go to that sort of small account and say, you're so stupid and dumb. And I don't want that.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah, that's not effective.
corrections are just tongue in cheek and not meant to be, cause drama or something like that. And I also think that if an account with thousands of followers, they should take a bit of responsibility, because if a person with one follower, like their mother, if they post something online that's not correct, it's going to be seen by 5 or 10 people maybe. The damage of that is very small.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone with thousands of followers, even just 10,000, says something that's wrong, it's going to be seen by thousands of people, and that's like an oil stain that keeps expanding and causing damage. People sometimes respond to tweets that are 10 years old, so you got to nip it in the bud. Especially with quotes, for instance, I stop responding to people who misquote if they don't have thousands of followers. And with other subjects, I sometimes decide not to, depending on the vibe I get from the account. If it's an innocent small account just talking a little bit for their friends, sometimes I go, oh, never mind. But if it's an account that wants to try and, that's a hateful account or a stupid account, or an account that has an extra, has an agenda with the lie they spread, I'll jump on it.
Okay, wait. So we have a lot of interesting things here to think on. You mentioned drama. What's a fun example of some drama that you making a correction has sparked?
Well, I don't really remember, but there was one discussion where someone said the astrolabe, this confusing calculus thing, was introduced to Europe in the Middle Ages.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, it originated in ancient Greece, the earliest version. So it's not quite right to say it was introduced in the Middle Ages. And they got really angry, and they shared a page of a museum that confirmed that story. So I called the museum. We had a chat, and within 24 hours, their website was changed. So I went back to the discussion, and by now, hundreds of people were following it. And I said to him, "What was that website that you shared again? that you used as a source?" And he shared it, and I said, "Can you read it? Read it again, a bit slower." And there, suddenly, the whole story had changed, thanks to me. And he got so angry. He apparently he called the museum and he was shouting and telling them to change it back, and they refused. And then he blocked me.
Yeah, that happens.
That was fun.
I always find people funny discussing things on history, about history or archaeology, with scholars or experts like you, because it's and me, and it's just like, they don't seem to they seem to have, some people have this idea that experts are wrong. And like, we agree. There's a lot of expert sources
All the
out there
time.
that are totally wrong, whether it's a museum website or an old publication or whatever. There's plenty of examples of wrong stuff. And so, but the problem is to understand it, you need to understand the actual primary evidence. And that takes a certain level of expertise that's beyond just reading journalism or museum websites.
And the simple idea that, you know, history doesn't change, never, ever. But our perspective changes all the time, and what we learn changes all the time. We find new evidence. We have new tools every day. And DNA has already killed quite a few myths, which is glorious. But yeah, things I believe today, I didn't believe 20 years ago. And that's because I learned something new. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just don't understand the drama.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. All right, there was another point that you brought up earlier about the damage that this can do. And so I wondered what some of your thoughts are in terms of what kind of damage does some of this fake history actually do to our society? Some of it seems kind of innocent and funny, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Well, it becomes dangerous when people use fake history or real history, for that matter, to be honest, to further a political agenda or ideological agenda. You know, earlier I mentioned the Moors. People use that because they want to believe and tell people that Europeans used to be filthy and inferior. And the same, of course, happens the other way around. This idea that Africa didn't have the wheel. Nobody in Africa had the wheel before Europeans taught them, or that Africans didn't have advanced civilizations and societies before the Europeans taught them. This comes from both ways, which I was surprised to find out. But you know, people use these stories.
Let me get an image for some people here. There we go.
Yeah, there you go. and things like that. First of all, I don't really understand why people have this need to feel better than others, especially based on history. I mean, people in the past, they did with what they could with the tools they had. And if in some parts of the world that was easier, great. They advanced a bit faster, well done. And in some parts it was harder, okay, they managed anyway eventually, so great, well done. We're all related, we all come from the same place, we all had the same troubles. So it's all a bit weird to me. When you research a lot of history, you find out that we're more alike than we're different, our ancestors. And for some reason a lot of people don't like that idea. I don't get it. But it is really funny and weird to be on one hand on one day correcting people who are saying Africans were inferior and couldn't do anything before they met Europeans, and then the next day do the same but exactly the other way around. It's so weird. But people use these fake history stories to prove their claim. You know, they say, look, these people were inferior because I read that they didn't have soap, or they didn't have the wheel, or that sort of thing. And I think one of the reasons I have so many followers is that a while back ago I corrected Ice-T.
Aha.
Mr. Ice. No, it wasn't Ice, not Ice-T. Someone else called Ice, a rapper. I don't know. But he had millions of followers, and he said Napoleon shot the nose of the Sphinx. And he was, for several days, he was posting tweets like that about all the statues in Africa that were damaged, and suggesting that there was an ulterior motive to that. And that is one of the funniest myths to debunk, because it's so easy to debunk, and it's so difficult to disagree with the debunking, because all you have to do is prove that someone somewhere in the world was talking about the Sphinx not having a nose before Napoleon was born. And we have that. We have people writing about it, we have people making sketches. So unless you believe in some sort of global conspiracy that goes back centuries, where everyone's faking everything, we know we know it wasn't Napoleon. Let's put it this way. We don't really know who did, but we know it wasn't Napoleon.
Yes.
That's that it's not that difficult to prove.
Much like this image of the Sphinx without a nose from 1737.
There you go. I mean,
there you go. This is all you.
I mean, the only way to explain Napoleon doing it is by proving that he had a time machine.
Yeah.
Which is going to be tricky.
So we get a sense this is used a lot for racism or ethnocentrism or nationalism, this kind of fake history. And as you said, real history sometimes too, though oftentimes twisted out of context. Okay, so why, I don't know, what makes this fun? What got you so obsessed? Is it just the fact that people learn from it and other people cheer you on, or
I think it's just because I like being annoying.
Okay, that's a good reason.
I mean, I've always been confrontational. My parents taught me that if you see something that's not right, say something, do something about it. I come from family members who were in the resistance during the war. If you don't like something, you do something about it. Oh, hello, there's a cat here. But I also come from a family where we enjoy having discussions, debating, disagreeing with each other. That is fun. Where I'm from, we used to spend entire evenings going, What do you mean? What do you mean? Prove it. that's
so you're saying growing up in your family was kind of like everybody else's Twitter experience.
Yeah, that's how it worked for us. You couldn't just come home and say, in school today I beat up a boy. My parents wouldn't automatically believe me. They'd say, oh yeah, why? What happened? We're going to call you teacher. Things like that. If I went to school and said to my friends, well, my dad's with the police and he's going to beat you up if you say something I don't like, they would say, oh yeah, prove it. Maybe it's Dutch. Maybe it's being Dutch. We are known for being confrontational and to the point and that sort of thing. Maybe it's cultural, I don't know, but we like that sort of thing. So that's what we do. That's what I did on the internet even before I started correcting fake history. I was already going, oh, that person I don't agree with. Let's have a fun debate. No, not all people think like that. I found, to my surprise, a lot of people say, "What? No." But yeah, I think it's just in my DNA, sort of.
Okay, I think that makes sense. I think it comes off very clearly on.
Yeah, but also if you are passionate about something, about history, about specific subjects, or politics, or cats, or anything for that matter, I think that if you're really passionate about something and you find someone who says something about that's just wrong, or even offensive or stupid, I think you have to be a special person to just go, oh well, never mind. I mean, I feel the urge immediately to go, wait a minute, hang on, you're wrong. I mean, what are you doing? You're talking nonsense. And I don't understand people who don't feel that, but so be it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And then at the same time, you don't just correct people online. You oftentimes go about movies and things like that. If I remember, you did one where you had a set of a movie. I can't seem to find it online, where you showed the actual photo of the medieval village. That it was like a.
I've got one of the Vikings, of Northmen, where they show a group of Vikings.
Okay, no, I was thinking about some village where it's like a.
Oh yes, that's an open air museum. And I made a meme out of it. It's when Hollywood films a medieval in an open air museum.
But basically, you took you gave this example of an open air museum where everything's nice and bright and cheerful and colorful, and then when Hollywood came into town, they changed the scenery completely to make it look all drab and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I to be fair, I use Hollywood as a sort of generic word for media,
of course.
The film industry. They got this beautiful open air museum, Middelaltercentret, I think it's called. It's somewhere in Scandinavia. It's a gorgeous tiny medieval town. And they have a street and a big fancy house and a couple of small houses, and it's really beautiful and it's well maintained, and it's been there for 20 years. So these houses are not new and fresh and clean. Mm-hmm. And for this, I think it's a German film that was set in 1401. they decided to make the entire village look like the cliche medieval village. So these beautiful, beautiful houses, they literally just threw mud at walls. They covered a well-paved street with filth. A nice bright red house had to be made a little bit less red. And they were literally just throwing random rags on buildings, and the straw roofs. No, a lovely plate roof had to be covered with straw. They went full cliche. And I made a nice little review saying, what were they thinking? Here's a nice wooden wall. Nothing wrong with wooden walls. And they got mud and straw and stuck it on there. Just a patch of random mud with straw on a wooden. You go, why? What's going on here? It made no sense. It was so weird. It's so over the top. But yeah.
It's so over the top, and it's just sort of like, why do this? You have a beautifully reconstructed open air museum and everything like that, that's authentic, made by historians, that's meant to sort of teach what this stuff looks like. And then Hollywood just says, no, instead of going actual accurate and authentic, we're going to go with something that just fits people's misconceptions of
and look at that beautiful red house. It doesn't fit our idea of the medieval people didn't like color. It had to be brown and dirty. And if you check the little meme, the cartoon that's below it, one down. That's by Niels Vergouwen. I think that's a really cool cartoon.
Yeah, exactly.
He made that before he saw what I did, but he perfectly fictionized it. It's so weird, but it's the image we have. It's the image the media has of what medieval life was. So that's what we're constantly fighting.
Yeah, and it's sort of, I think we need to demand better from our media to a certain degree.
And even recently, Northman, this massive big budget medieval film, a Viking film, millions of dollars budget, lots of research went into it. If you look for the details, you see some amazing details, really perfect. Clearly they had good historical consultants working on it. Their clothes are with beautiful, vibrant colors, wonderful, fantastic, applause. And then the last day, when they're almost finished, they say, oh, let's click on the blue filter. And everything is blue. The colors are all drowned out. Suddenly it's boring again. It's so weird. The past has to be dark and dirty and dingy and no colors. We're allergic to that.
Yeah, well, it's how we convince ourselves that our life today is so superior. Yeah. It's because we say, well, everybody in the past sucked. When that's just not true. They were people like you and me who figured out how to live
snobbery.
Yes.
And
don't get me wrong, I love electricity and running water and the internet. They are improvements. But that does not mean that people that lived in the past had shitty lives.
No, the interesting thing about history is that you learn, the more you learn about, the more you realize that some things get better, some things get worse, and then it changes around again. So maybe one day we'll manage to get the best bits of all of history and put them together and skip on the bad bits one day. But some people really don't like the idea that progress is not a straight line. It doesn't. It comes. It goes up and down, and
it's never even across the world. You can look at areas around the world where people are living in the worst conditions you could imagine right now because of the ability for us to oppress them. Or
interesting. I've had this. They had completely blacked that out. They remembered the 1930s, not from their own memories, but from what was taught them. And so I then talked to them and said, do you remember when this happened? And do you remember that it was the glory days of cinema? Do you remember that you had a radio and you would spend your evenings with the family listening to the radio instead of everyone behind their own tablet or screen or computer in their own room? And of course, there is a lot of nostalgia here, which can be a bit tricky. But when you talk to someone who only believes the negative things about a certain subject, you sometimes have to put a bit of nostalgia on top of it. Try to get to their actual core memories. And they suddenly started realizing that it wasn't all bad. They started sharing their fun memories and and then one lady said to me, and I thought that was really fascinating. She said to me, "I didn't know we had it bad till someone taught us that." And I thought that is interesting because childhood is great. They had fun, they were happy, and then suddenly someone said, "Oh, 1930s, all depression and poverty," and they were going, "Oh, really? Oh." and and for instance, also one lady said to me during she lived through the war, and she repeated this idea that the Dutch have, that we didn't have a lot of resistance, and I said, well, I don't really agree with that. There was quite a lot of resistance and things like that. And she said, well, I myself did a bit of spreading of underground anti-Nazi newspapers, but that wasn't resistance. And I said, well, you're wrong there. It was resistance. What do you think would have happened if the Nazis caught you? And she suddenly realized that she spent the war doing resistance activities that could have cost her life. And she was always diminishing her own acts. She was always going, oh, no, what I did wasn't really resistance. Mm-hmm. And there she was in front of her children and grandchildren, learning for the first time that what she did was considered, at least by me and by many others, as an act of resistance, a dangerous act of resistance. And this inferiority complex that she almost had, but she's been telling her children and her grandchildren, oh, no, I did nothing during the war. It was just a housewife thing. Suddenly melted away. And that was fascinating to watch. Suddenly she was like, wow, look at me, look what I did. And that was like 40, 50 years after the war. So that was
wow.
That is fascinating how not just people, their own personal experience are colored by what they're taught.
Yeah.
by what the media says, by what everyone sort of generally believes it, and they start to believe it as well, even though it clashes with what they actually went through.
Yeah, well, I mean, memory is not perfect in a sense, and
it can be colored.
It can very, very much be colored. There's a lot of evidence on that. Okay, so do you have one last anecdote you want anybody listening along to know is not true?
There are so many. Hugo Boss didn't design the Nazi uniforms. The Iron Maiden was not really a medieval torture device.
I thought it was a band.
I wouldn't know about that. I only listen to Glenn Miller. But yeah, there are too many to mention. But those are some of those are the fun ones. The first interracial kiss on television was not on Star Trek. That's also a fun one because you get to deal with Trekkies.
Yeah, you mentioned in your book your history with William Shatner. I've had a history with him on Twitter as well.
I'm not surprised. Yeah, he blocked me quite early on.
he called me a schoolyard bully.
Cool. Have you ever been a schoolyard? You don't see nothing personal. We don't seem the type to be a schoolyard bully.
I just told him that his ideas on history and archaeology were wrong, but apparently that makes me
a bully. Dare you?
How dare I?
Yeah, that is so weird. And when someone says to me you're wrong, I go, ooh, interesting. Tell me more. Maybe I can learn something exciting and new, and I'm fine with that. That's no problem. But apparently, some people can't handle it.
I have a deeper question for you.
I deny everything. Was it me? I didn't do it.
No.
He bit himself in the back.
I was just thinking how today, when you look at stuff like history and archaeology on social media, whether it's Twitter or YouTube or TikTok, the legitimate sources, it seems like most of the most popular ones are doing debunking. Why is debunking so popular in today's world as opposed to telling a good history or archaeology narrative?
Well, I like to think I do both.
Yeah.
I write a lot of history threads with real history as well. But I think debunking is interesting because people are starting to realize that so much that we know is nonsense, and it tickles us. We're excited by that. We go, if that was wrong, what I was taught, maybe everything else was wrong as well. So it's extra interesting. But I think all of us are also a little bit of a troll. So we like drama. So when someone says that's wrong, we like to read along the thread and see all the people get angry and upset. We're only human. I think it's part of our nature in a way. But yeah, I mean, it is fascinating. It's always interesting, even if you don't like hearing it. People are interested by the idea that something they believe might be wrong. I mean, that's why 90% of Twitter is people arguing about things. If you say something and someone else says wrong and you don't care, you don't respond, but people respond. So I think it's part of our nature that when someone says no, you go, true, yes, wait, what? Tell me more.
Yeah, so it's the drama, I guess. People like drama.
People like disagreeing about stuff.
Yeah.
Because, and I sometimes tell people who end their discussion, well, I don't really care anyway, by reminding them that we just spent 3 days discussing it. And
you're the type of person that likes to get the last word, I can tell.
Yeah, and if I or I say that to the person I'm discussing, because then they usually stop talking. But if people really didn't care about someone telling them they're wrong, they wouldn't even respond, and they generally always do. So that's a bit of a self-tell. When you start with a fight, but you end with a sort of getting together, that is the best. That's the best thing. I mean, I've got followers on Twitter who started following me after we had a fierce argument and debate, and are now, sharing my tweets. and that is that is really cool. I really enjoy that, when you sort of feel you reached something, you achieved something with someone.
Yeah, I think it's important that at least that some people realize real history rather than the fake history stuff is good.
But in the end, the only thing I really want people to learn is to keep to think critically, to learn how to do research, to not blindly believe something because they want to believe it, or because the source seems reliable. I mean, I still can't get my head around it that people believe TikTok videos with no sources, no references, a video that's completely AI generated, makes no sense. The text is AI generated. Someone put it on TikTok and they go, oh, well, it says something I want to believe, so it must be true. So it's and of course, paintings, historical paintings, many of them were absolute fantasy.
Of course, yeah, or exaggeration,
So every time there's a change in technology, there's something new. People learn to be critical, but then they forget it, which is a problem.
Yeah, so we're gonna need more fake history hunters, is what it sounds like. Are you gonna open up an academy or something?
Sure.
All right, perfect. Well, the first step for everybody is to go buy your book. It's a great read. It gives you some you're going to learn some things that are not true that you thought were true. There were a couple in there that there were a lot that I'd never heard of, but no, everybody should read it. It is well written, and it's fun, and it's useful, and everybody should learn to think rigorously and critically, and to do research and deep dives into the evidence that's in front of us that we sit there and talk about.
Rhymes and riddles, tickle, tickle, giggles, squiggle, jiggle, fiddle, Flint and Dibble. Rhymes and riddles, tickle, tickle, giggles, squiggle, jiggle, fiddle, dibble, 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 dibble. Flint and Dibble.